When I was a young child, my grandmother, Grandma Rowe, we called her, came to live with us. She was only 60 years of age at the time, which to a 5-year-old seems ancient. But now that I'm a few years north of 40, doesn't seem so old anymore. Prior to her coming to live with us, visits from Grandma Rowe, though fairly frequent, never lasted more than a week or so. I cherish a few fleeting memories of her doing what grandmas do best, namely spoiling her grandchildren. I remember her feeding the raccoons from her hand off our back porch, St. Francis-like. I remember a train ride in the fall foliage. I remember a drum set she gave me to make as much racket as my heart desired. Mostly, I remember that Grandma Rowe was someone who made me feel special. Her move to our home was preceded by a stay in the hospital. As a kid, my experience of hospitals had been limited to the comfy confines of the doctor's lounge, where I would have to hang tight while my dad did his weekend rounds. While no one was looking, I would sneak several of those little ice creams that you have to eat with a wooden stick. But the visit to Grandma Rowe's hospital room was different. It's hard for me to believe now that she was only 60, because in my memory, she seemed like she must have been at least 100 years old. My parents shared with my sister and me that Grandma Rowe had lung cancer. She, like many of her peers, had smoked socially for decades, and by the time she had finally quit, the tar and nicotine had irreparably damaged her lungs. When she came home to live in our home on 12 Deer Run, her large and complex hospital bed took up most of the space in the small sunroom. She loved it, though, because it was always full of light and looked out on our backyard and into the woods. On December 27th, 2 days after Christmas, I was sitting on our large blue, very 1980s sectional sofa. My parents came in and turned off the television. They told me that Grandma Rowe had died. For years, I was embarrassed about this next detail. But my immediate reaction when my parents told me she had died was to start laughing. It was a nervous laughter that bubbled up within me as I struggled to comprehend she couldn't be dead. She was just in the next room. I had just been in there a few hours ago. Why would my parents joke like this? At her funeral a few days later, I remember walking up to the inanimate body of Grandma Rowe lying in the casket. I picked up her hand and held it in mine. No one told me that I couldn't or shouldn't, and so I did. And her hand was cold. It was the first time anyone close to me, someone whom I loved, had died. It was the first time someone close to me had died, but it would not be the last. What about you? Do you recall the first time you were confronted with death and dying? How old were you when you first felt the sting, the shock, the finality of mortality? Though I doubt this was the first brush with death for Mary, the mother of Jesus, and John, the disciple whom he loved, I have to imagine the crucifixion of Jesus was far and away the most brutal and violent that they had ever witnessed. In the face of such tremendous physical agony, Jesus speaks to them, cares for them, creating a new community forged in the crucible of suffering. Woman, here is your son, he says. And to his young disciple, here is your mother, a new family, one that transcends biology, is being born in the shadow of death. It is an inescapable reality that our lives are full of deaths, some large and some small. And not every death, of course, is a physical death. There are deaths of hopes and dreams, deaths of relationships, and a million more deaths dealt to us during our lifetime. Now, a true confession. I have often found Good Friday to be among the hardest days to preach. You see, our task as preachers is to proclaim the good news, to interpret what the Spirit of God might be saying through these texts to this community on this occasion. But Good Friday is so damn difficult. We must sit here and stare. We have to remain at the foot of the cross and not jump to conclusions about what comes next. It's not that we have to sit here and pretend like we don't know the rest of the story. It's that we have to sit here and recognize that the crucifixion is still happening today. As children die in their schools, as human rights are deteriorated, as sinful systems degrade and oppress human beings created in the image and likeness of God, the crucifixion is not merely a thing of the past, but a present reality. And so the hardest thing to do this day, and so it would seem that all that is left to do is give up. To sigh, it is finished. To breathe our last. All that is left to do is die. A mentor of mine once shared a paraphrase of Julian of Norwich's famous saying, "All shall be well, all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well." Acknowledging the pervasiveness of suffering, all of these little crosses and deaths in our lives, he would say, in the end, all shall be well. And if all is not well, it is not the end. My friends, on Good Friday, all is not well. Jesus, along with many of our hopes and dreams, has been crucified. Jesus, along with many of those we love, has died. Yet we hold on to this small kernel of hope. In the end, all shall be well. And if all is not well, it is not the end.